I'm John Buchanan. What we're going to do within this episode is take a kind of slightly deeper look at one of my favourite processing techniques whenever what you want to do is to bring extra colour and character to sounds and to put you out of your misery. We're talking about bit crushing. Now, bit crushing is one of a number of different types of distortion effect that exist within Logic, and we have a number of those now, whether you're looking at clip distortion, the excellent Chroma Glow, which is a kind of like a saturation tool, or bit crushing. And what we can do with bit crushers is to basically emulate the behavior of early digital equipment. In the days before we had CD quality, and indeed better than CD quality when it came to audio sampling, what would happen with the earlier samplers is that they were either kind of 8-bit or 12-bit machines. And with that comes a kind of character which is actually a bit warmer, a bit nicer, and just a bit more fuzzy. And before we discover exactly what we can do with that kind of fuzziness, we're going to listen to an absolutely pristine Rhodes sound within this track that I've prepared. No processing on it at all. This is Logic's own electric piano, and it sounds like this. Okay, very pristine. It's a great sound, it's really nice, but it's not very warm. Now, of course, this was a really early thing that people said about digital recordings, particularly as quality of digital recording got better. What suddenly a lot of people would say was, you know what though, it doesn't really have the warmth of tape-based recordings or sounds passing through preamps and other analog circuits which warm up sounds in different ways. And to an extent that's true. And really what we've got here is this, as I say, pristine Rhodes, which sounds really great, but doesn't really have a lot of that kind of oozy warm character. And we're going to change that. And rather than doing that by adding saturation, which would be a really obvious place to go, we're going to do it with bit crushing instead. Okay, so firstly, I don't know why the library's open. I mean, it's good that libraries are open, but that's not really the point that I'm making right now. What we're going to do is to come to this Rhodes sound, solo it by itself, and discover exactly what we have available when we open up a Bitcrusher. I'm going to find the Bitcrusher in the distortion menu. It's here, and when I instantiate it on the first insert, then of course it's going to be a sound. The original sound is going to pass through my settings here. I've got a couple of really important settings. Firstly, I've got an overall drive amount, which is going to push this sound into the Bitcrusher circuit. Imagine that I'm resampling this sound through a circuit of a limited bit depth. That's what the drive amount does. See it as a kind of pre-gain for whatever we're going to then go on to do with the Bitcrusher. Then I've got the all-important resolution dial. Now, as I said, these days we record at beautiful 24-bit, and of course, in the early days of CD, we were working, well, not just the early days of CD quality is 16-bit, and again, it's a pristine sounding resolution. The moment we get below that, what we're going to discover is that the sound starts to just begin to break up, and that will sound, to start with, incredibly subtle, and as I pull resolution down, it will become less subtle. Let's start at 16-bit. audio fart. Okay, so at resolution of 1 bit, there isn't enough resolution to actually even produce a signal. And of course, 2 bit's really extreme and it's kind of fun, but totally bonkers and so on and so forth. But to actually play a bit of audio back like that, where we have a chance to hear each individual resolution, you can begin to really appreciate the difference, even at much higher resolutions. That at around 14 bits, there is an obvious beginning to the fact that we get these kind of particularly aliasy artifacts. And of course, below 12 bit, we start to get this kind of hissy sort of a thing happening. Sounds a little bit like the sprinkler system is on in the garden. But not only that, but what we're getting is a less sort of detailed picture of the audio which is being produced. And of course, we're sort of seeing that over here as well. Let's have a look at this window over here. So what we've got a chance to do here is to see, if you like, a kind of pixelation of the sound, rather than this absolutely beautiful waveform where we get this sort of perfect, sort of wondrous thing happening. Instead, what happens is we're deliberately clipping the signal, and the kind of pixelation of what the audio sounds like begins to break up. It's literally like a kind of low resolution image, is the audio version of that. And then what we get alongside that is downsampling. And what that does is to further push this idea of pixelation, this idea that the picture that we're looking at is kind of distorted. Resolution, think about that almost as a sort of, how often is the sound being sampled? Is it being sampled all of the time, and therefore we get this amazingly kind of pristine picture? Or is it being sampled less often? And then the downsampling is, what is the quality of the audio image every single time it is sampled? Has it got an enormous amount of depth to it, or is it a slightly shallower audio picture, if you like? Those two things working in tandem can produce some really interesting results. And the downsampling is going to produce a series of really aliasy overtones, almost like a kind of bell-like quality over the top. I'll show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is to choose a resolution of 12 bit, and this time what I'm going to do is to adjust the downsampling amount. And of course, we could do that all day because it's just so much fun. Okay, so what could we do with Bitcrushing to play a kind of creative role within this mix? Well, for a start, we could do exactly what I've just been doing, which would be to potentially produce a variation to the amount of Bitcrushing on each individual chord. I'll show you what I mean by that. So what I'm going to do is to open up automation itself, and what we're going to do is to use the Marquee tool to make sure that we're drawing some lines around each individual specific chord. Okay, so firstly, let's come and choose the parameter that we want. I'm going to come to the Bitcrusher, and we'll start with the parameter we were just playing with, downsampling. And then what I'm going to do is to press T to bring up the toolbar, and I'm interested in using the Marquee tool. So what I can do is to come and find it, this little crosshairs symbol here, gives us the Marquee tool. And then what I can do is to draw around each individual chord. And then what I can do is to just click. And when I do that, I get a specific point. And if I do that on every single chord, we'll just do a couple of bars of this. So what I have a chance to do is to just literally click every time I want to. And then what I can do is to just draw these around the chords that I'm working on. And every time I go back to the pencil tool and click, what I do is to get 2 points around this. So what I could do would be to start with really a small amount of downsampling, and then what we could do would be to sort of step through the gears a little bit more like that. And what I'm going to do is to just put a loop around this section here, and we'll have a listen to that. And what we could do would be to pair that with, let's come back again to the Bitcrusher, and this time I'm going to come to resolution. Now at the moment I think I'm working at 12 bits, but again with the Marquee tool, what I could do would be again to click around each individual chord and just make sure that I'm slightly varying these. So I don't want to go absolutely crazy. We've got quite a lot of downsampling doing crazy for us. I'm going to start with 14 bit, then we'll move to 12. And of course the other way that I could do that if I wanted to would be to create 2 points of my own around these chords, And that, of course, will allow me to then select something else. I'm going to come back down to 8-bit for the third chord. And then we get all that fizz, which comes from an 8-bit signal. For some reason, that's a hard thing to say. Now, of course, this is really extreme. We're getting the full version of this. Let's listen to it with the bass line and the beats. So if you like the idea of this, but it seems overwhelming, then of course what we need to do is to reopen the plugin and recognize that what we've got here is a mix dial. And what this is going to allow us to do is to decide how much of this we actually want to hear. What, for example, happens if I take it down to just sort of 20% of the mix level? So it's just a fifth of the signal. Well, that's really nice. Suddenly we've got this kind of subtle treatment of something which is really quite extreme. Okay, so that's one thing that we could do. And of course, what I could then do would be to decide that I wanted something similar to happen in all the subsequent bars. Now, this is a technique that I've shown you before, but I'm going to show you again, because what we've done is quite a lot of work to get these kind of lumps happening in our automation in these first 4 bars. And of course, I could get the Marquee tool out and I could reproduce this over and over and over again. But what I actually want to do is to isolate the automation data that I've created in these first 4 bars, repeat it, and assign it to the Rhodes part in the subsequent bars. And I think the best way to do that is like this. I'm going to select my Rhodes part, and what I'm then going to do is to come to track, and I'm going to come to other, and I want a new track with the same instrument. Now what that means is that I get a second track, but which is assigned completely to the Rhodes part. This isn't a duplicate track, this is the same track. Why would I do that? Well, imagine a situation where what I wanted to do was to record a bass note for each chord that I had made. Rather than recording over the existing part, I might choose to do that on a separate track, and then I could merge them afterwards. The advantage of that is that I just now get a track, and because it's the same track, I get all of that automation data. And as a result of that, what it means is that if I was to use the pencil tool to create a region around those 4 bars, and then what I did was to copy that data, and I copied it twice the second time round. What that's going to do is to copy all of the data, and because it's the same track, really, the same part, of course, what we're seeing is all of that play out on the track above it as well. And when I've done that, I can get rid of these regions. I can be careful not to erase the automation data because I want to keep it. And then what I can do is to get rid of my duplicate track, and it's gone, and now we've just got the automation data playing out across all of that region. And of course, what I can then do is to choose a different value for all of these. So without thinking too hard, I'm in a position to go through and say, okay, I want each of these to be subtly different. It seems like the next one changes when I change the one before it. That's okay, because of course I can go back in and make a change to those however I like. So that's the resolution changing, and the same thing is true for the downsampling. I might decide I want that one to be 12-bit, and so on and so forth. So I've got a chance literally just to go through unbelievably quickly and make these all subtly different so that we've got an ever-evolving line. And by the time I get to the end of my sentence, I've also got to the end of the Rhodes part. And that's really nice. But as always, we're going to go one step further. Now then, what if I decide that all of that is just too much? I like the Rhodes, it's fine, even though I've told you I sort of don't because it feels a bit pristine. So in other words, what I'm going to do is just turn off my Bitcrusher altogether. By turning it off, all of that automation data isn't going to happen. Another subtle way of being able to introduce this kind of an effect would be to do it on an auxiliary bus after another effect. In other words, let's keep the Rhodes exactly as it is right now, but let's add a bit crushed version of an effect to it to produce this kind of color without it being an insert and therefore quite so extreme. What I'm going to do is to experiment with a couple of possibilities here. The first thing I'm going to do is to send this through to the first available auxiliary bus. It looks like bus 5 is the next one I have available. I'm going to turn up the send level, perhaps not quite that much. And then what I'm going to do is to come and find tape delay, one of my favorites, as well you know. And I'm going to extend out the frequency range around this particular sound. I'm going to make sure that we've got, I don't know, a slightly more interesting rhythm than just a straight quarter note. Let's make that a dotted eighth. And I'm going to make the wet level 100%. Okay, so that's going to give me a delay. Quite like that. And with that, we get a little bit of our flutter, which is why I like this delay so much. Okay, so what if I were to put my Bitcrusher after this effect? Let's start with a kind of 12-bit resolution and a 2 times downsampling. So in other words, what this is doing is it's downsampling the delay. The original piano, electric piano, is as it was. The delay is now the thing which is going to get a bit fuzzed up. Okay, that's a pretty subtle effect if I keep it at 3 times downsampling 12-bit. Let's see what that's doing for the mix. Okay, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to punch this in halfway through. So I'm going to slightly turn up the send level. I'm going to mute the return channel. So this is just going to be the original Rhodes until bar 11, and I'll punch it in. I really like that. And of course you may. Yes, I'll turn on the original Bitcrusher too. So this is now the one that's working as the insert, and then we also have the one that's working on a delay. And because we've got 2 of them, I'm sort of going to make sure that I've got my mix amount available here, because I don't think we're going to need a lot of this to really feel like we're in kind of Bitcrusher land. What a land that would be. Well, I know what I would do next, and that is to go into latch mode and draw some mix dial changes. But I'm going to leave that to you because you have now got, hopefully, a better understanding of the way that the Bitcrusher works and a few techniques for how you might integrate it into your workflow. And this idea of making it a feature by using the mix dial to decide how much of it feels like a nice addition to the resolution and downsampling that we're using as well. But remember, what we also have is a separate Bitcrusher, which is kind of statically just warming up in that kind of digital aliasy way our tape delay effect as well. So it's no great surprise that I love this sound. I suspect you probably do too. It's up to you to decide how much of a feature you want to make it when it comes to warming up kind of slightly cold digital sounds like this one.